Hey bass friends, welcome back to my channel. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe, like, comment, share, all that good stuff. So today I want to talk about strings and the importance of strings. When I think about strings, I think about strings as like the tires on your cars. They're the first point of contact when you're driving on the road. You know what I mean? There's the first thing that touches the ground, and if not the only thing that should be touching the ground. And sometimes people may put more attention to like other details on the vehicle, which are important, like decals or like subwoofers or the paint job or whatever, which are things that are important to the vehicle, to the owner's eyes. But imagine cheaping out on your tires. It would not be a good thing. It doesn't matter how great your suspension is. It doesn't matter about anything. If those tires are not good, you probably might not have the best ride down the road. So I like to think about bass strings the same way. It's the first point of contact to get a note out. So your bass strings are is very important, just like anything else on the bass. So you have to put a lot of attention to what strings you're using. You gotta choose, the right strings. You gotta experiment with strings. You just gotta say 1 month I'm gonna use this set, next month I'm gonna use that set, and you see what work and you see what doesn't work. Right? It's just as that simple. It's a little investment, but it'll be worth it. So yeah, so today I want to talk about 5 pro tips. The first tip regarding strings is the different string types, because there's all kinds of different strings out there. There's flat wounds, there's round rounds, there's hex core, there's taper core. There's all different kind of strings, but those are like some of the main types of strings. So I'm not here to discuss and go to detail about each one of those, but I would like for you to do some research. Take that short list that I just called out right now and go and look it up online, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's those different kinds, and they all sound different. They produce different sounds. The second pro tip here is the gauge. The gauge of the string is almost everything. I had an incident in the past where I had the wrong gauge string on my bass, and it was a nightmare. So basically, what it was, I had a low B string that was too heavy of a gauge for an instrument, and it would cause a lot of fret buzz. But I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was the action, so I adjusted the saddle, adjusted the truss rod, and it didn't fix the problem. So I finally said, after like a few days, after realizing that it wasn't either of those things, I finally said, let me change the strings. So I changed the strings to a medium set, which normally that's what I play. Is because I bought the bass, and the strings that came on the bass was a heavier gauge due to his previous owner. So when I changed it to the medium, it fixed the problem. The low B was lush. It resonated properly, and there was no issues. But I think what it maybe was, it probably was two things. It was the gauge, and also it was the fact that the strings are probably old and they were stretched out, so the scale probably was longer, and it didn't have enough room to resonate. So that's why it would knock against the frets, causing fret buzz. And of course, when you fret it, it's even worse because you shorten the string as you fret it, and that's causing even more fret buzz on the frets following the fret that you fretted. So gauge is important. There's different gauge, like heavy gauge, like I mentioned. There's medium gauge, and there's light gauge, and then there's gauges in between each one of those categories. I've seen that. I've seen like medium, light. I've seen all kinds of stuff. So string companies are becoming more in tune with what customers are wanting. But I would say definitely experiment with string gauge. But there's hints and obvious things that you got to pay attention to with your particular bass and with your style of playing and what music you go for, that kind of stuff, and what you're looking for with the strings. So my advice is, like, if, for example, if you're looking for something more aggressive, you might want that heavier gauge stuff, right? So that way you get more bottom end from your lower strings, right? So it may be beneficial to go for that. But if you want something more like jazzy and smooth, you might have to go with a medium just so that way everything sustains properly, or your note sustains properly. Um, the sound that you produce is very accurate with frequencies and stuff like that. And that's the other thing too, frequencies, obviously from pitch. If you want that accuracy, that your string has a lot to do with that. You know what I mean? Having that accurate low B sound, having that accurate, fretted C, that true frequency. So that's something to pay attention to with string gauge. The next thing here, the third pro tip, is material. So there's several different types of material, but some of the main material is stainless steel and nickel. It really just boils down to what you're looking for in terms of feel. Of course, it affects the sound, but I think you should put feel of the strings as a priority over the sound. I know that sounds weird. Just give me a second, I'll get there. The reason why is because imagine you on a gig for 4 hours and you're playing with this set of strings that are just, rough on your fingers. Like every time you play a note, it just feels like there's this, gravel that is like scratching your fingers. I've been there. So you want to pay attention to material for that. And for me personally, I like that silky smooth type of feel. And I get that from sometimes stainless steel, but mainly nickel. And I really like nickel. And I think there's some companies that actually blend the two, where there's like a composite material of stainless steel and nickel. And those feel great as well. So pay attention to material for the feel. Of course, it affects the sound. So that's probably the next thing you look into. Do I want to compromise the feel for the sound, or do I want to compromise the sound for the feel? But I feel like most string companies are doing a great job at, regardless of what material it is, their strings sound really good. You just had to choose the right gauge and the right scale and that kind of stuff. Which brings me to the next pro tip. Tip number 4 is scale. Scale length is very, very important. Do not disregard that. It is very, very important. There's, short scale strings, there's long scale strings, etc. And people like me, when I first started buying strings, I'd be like, oh, I'll just cut it to length. And you realize you're cutting a huge chunk of the string because it's a long scale set and your bass is not a long scale bass. And long scale could be like 35 inch, 36 inch, or whatever it is. So you pay attention to your scale length. If it's your average scale length, which is like 34, then you may want to avoid getting a long scale, because the thing is, when you get a long scale, you're cutting, like if you cut too much of that string off, you could affect the core that's running through it, right? So you don't want to change the nature of the string just because it's not the right scale, and then you might run into some issues, right? So the thing is, get the proper scale. And also, one of the biggest tests for me is like playing that open string. If does it have that resonance you're looking for? When I hit that low I always pick out the low B, because the low B always gives me the most trouble. When you hit that low B, are you getting that proper resonance? And if the answer is yes, then you most likely have the right scale on your bass. So you got to experiment with that a little bit. But, if your bass is not long scale, please avoid getting the long scale. The next thing here, the last pro tip, is maintenance. Maintenance is very, very important. I know it's cliche. Yeah, I got to maintain this. Yeah, I got to cut the grass. Yeah, I got to, trim my beard. Yeah, I got to do all this stuff. I know it's like one of those things like, yeah, it's obvious. It's, it's cliche. But, you'll be surprised at how many people just leave an old set of strings on their bass. And, when they change their string, it's like a completely new, different bass. I've had that experience where, I might have gotten lazy and didn't change the strings, or, whatever the case may be. And then I changed the string and I was like, wow, like this bass sounds like a totally new animal. So maintenance is important. I would suggest that you actually track the date that you change your string, so that way you have an accurate, representation of when you change your string. So that way the next set you could probably like plan for like maybe the next month or 2 to 3 weeks. It depends on how many playing hours you put into the bass. If you're practicing, if you're using this particular bass with a set of strings that you're practicing and playing live, then you probably might need to change it sooner. Might maybe like within 2 to 3 weeks, opposed to like a month. You know, if it's something that you just use just to play live and you have a lot of practice space, then maybe a month or two is fine. So just kind of like, gauge it, kind of just get a sense of what the routine, what the pattern is on when you need to change the strings. The other thing I could say about string maintenance is each and every time that you play and you put down your instrument, before you put it back on the stand or in your gig bag or your case, wipe it down, because these hands love to produce moisture, sweat, and all those kind of things while we play, and that usually tends to corrode the strings quicker and kill the strings quicker, and the sound and the freshness. So get a cotton rag. It could be an old t-shirt or whatever. It just wipe the strings down like maybe 5 times. Just go up and down, wipe it down. That helps a lot. It preserves your strings. It keeps them fresh. It just makes life better. And also the other thing with maintenance I like to talk about as something as an advantage is that the more you change the strings, the better condition your frets will be in. If you're using old strings, obviously they tend to stretch out over time. That's a given, right? And that could cause issues with, notes and intonation and all that kind of stuff. So, and the other thing is, your frets are kind of like beating up against those strings, right? Because the strings, it's material, and it could be bent, it could be all kinds of stuff. So the frets will manipulate the strings. So over time, if the strings are really old, and you're using it over time, and your strings could be counterproductive and affect the wear and the tear of your frets. So it's important to change your strings for those kind of reasons, and just to keep a fresh set each and every time. But yeah, if you want the most out of your bass, the optimal performance, as far as like, it goes to just keeping your bass up to maintenance and it being at its optimized position to play, change your strings. Change your strings. So yeah, this is my 5 pro tips. I know there's a lot more to talk about with strings, but these are just my 5 pro tips regarding strings. Hope you found this video helpful. Please subscribe. Please like, comment, share. I'll see you in the next video.